Your blood group is pretty important information if you're ever to need a blood transfusion or even an organ transplant. It's even more important for the blood bank, who have to find donors to match your blood type, and for everyone else who might need blood or a blood product. The problem is that the information used by the blood bank to understand what blood groups are out there and in what numbers is 20 years old, 20 years. And when researchers went out to find and update the prevalence of blood groups in the Australian population, they got a bit of a surprise. It's changed quite significantly. And that has implications for how and where they look for donors. And just so you understand the jargon, blood types are determined by markers on the surface of red blood cells. Those are the blood cells that carry the oxygen in your blood. And the markers are A and or B. And if you've neither A nor B or both, you're called O. Then there's rhesus, which can be positive or negative. A very important blood group is O rhesus negative or O negative, because that's the one that's least likely to cause an immune reaction because you haven't got very much of anything on the surface of your red blood cell. And in an emergency, it can be given when there's no time to find out a patient's blood type. It's called the universal donor. Dr. Reena Hirani of the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood is the lead author of the study, which is published in today's Medical Journal of Australia. Welcome to the Health Report, Reena.
Thank you to you both for having me today.
Now, you surveyed blood samples from the blood bank and pathology labs?
We looked at some data points from 1.3 million Australian patients and also 500,000 blood donors and compared them to find out what the proportions of blood types were across the nation.
So what was the pattern 20 years ago and what's changed when it comes to blood groups?
Yeah, so our previous estimates in the 90s said that we had approximately 19% of rhesus negative individuals. But with our latest finding, we're finding that Australia is becoming more positive and that there are now 14% rhesus negative people in the community.
Now, that's important because, well, first of all, it's important for O negative because presumably you've got fewer people who've got O negative.
That's correct, yes.
So what's the gap between demand for O negative and the supply in terms of if you've got people, in terms of what's available in the community?
Look, we're very lucky in Australia, actually, because Australia has one of the most stable blood supplies in the world. However, there's still some sort of difficulties in obtaining enough universal O-neg blood types. So it's important that we have the ability to understand the information that we're gathering of what's required in the community so that we can try and work out how our blood donor panel can match what we actually need in our patients.
Now, if O negative has fallen, can you use O positive as a universal donor?
And that's what's exciting about this research is that we can try to see what proportions of O positive we can use in the community, and maybe O positive will become the new universal blood type in Australia, which is incredibly exciting.
Now, that's because you don't get as big a reaction when the rhesus types interact.
That's right. So if we can provide O positive blood to RHD positive people, then that means that we can collect O positive more easily and use that in emergencies and have less reactions when we transfuse people.
Now, the other group which is problematic when rhesus negative declines is newborns, because sometimes you have to do what's called an exchange transfusion when they've got life-threatening jaundice and they need Rh negative blood.
Yes, so look, we'll always need O negative blood for all sorts of reasons. And so, what we're trying to do is to make sure we understand what is required in our patient population, make sure we collect what we need and still have enough supply available for situations where we don't know the patient's blood group and need to transfuse with O negative.
So it's not just that.
There's requirements in obstetrics.
But it's not just that, it's the other blood groups as well. So B and AB positive have declined. Why are these changes occurring?
So the group B and AB, what we found in our research is that the percentages of those are actually increasing in the community. And so they're more commonly found because of the ethnic backgrounds that have come into Australia. So that's something that's really interesting. And so, that's basically what's happening in the community.
Give me an example of ethnic groups and the sort of differences from, say, Anglo-Irish Australians.
Sure. So group B and AB are more commonly found in Asia, Southeast Asia, India, China, Pakistan, Nepal. And so they are also more likely to be RHD positive as well.
So it's simply that pattern of migration. Now, is this a problem? Because presumably the people who need the blood match the donor group. So is there a mismatch here, so to speak?
Look,
you know what I'm saying? In other words, if it's changed in the in other words, is the donor group very different from the recipient group, from the population?
So with our first-time blood donors, what we've actually found is that they're very similar in proportions to the patient groups. So what that means is that it reflects the diversity we're getting in our community. However, it's always important for O-negative blood donors to come in, and if they're O-negative, it's highly likely that a family member is O-negative, and we are encouraging people to find out and ask their family members to come and donate blood, because it's a fun way to find out about your blood group.
So are you now actively recruiting in new communities that you haven't previously gone to, where you know that there's higher density of people with particular blood groups because of their ethnic background?
We're always working to diversify our blood donor panel. So we're working with sports groups and religious groups, community leaders. We've recently done some work with the Islamic Medical Council to diversify our panels according to what we predict we might need into the future due to our patient information.
And culturally, are people tuned into blood donation? If they're relatively recent migrants to Australia?
Yeah, that's something that we are constantly working on, and we as with everything, need to get some community support from people to help us do that most effectively. And I guess it's important to know that even though there's certain blood groups that we're talking about here, the 8 main ones, there's actually 41 different blood group systems with hundreds of different antigens, and some are very specific to cultural backgrounds. So it's important to diversify our panels to allow for that as well. I
was going to ask you that, because these are the Landsteiner groups, which go back to about 1914. Just very briefly, how important are all the other blood types that you've got out there?
They can be incredibly important. I'm not sure if you remember Zainab back in 2019. She needed a very specific blood type. It was called Indian B. She actually needed the blood to be negative for that, and that was only possible in people with Pakistan, Indian or Iranian backgrounds. So in order to do that, we needed to call upon those particular cultural groups to come in and see if they were Indian B negative. So what we actually want is to encourage people to register their ethnicity in the Lifeblood app, because it can really help us find potential donors when rare blood is needed. And we do this using genetic technologies to analyse the extensive blood groups. And we've identified 154 donors with rare blood groups so far.
Great. So we'll have a link to that app on our website. Rena, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Rena Hirani is a Senior Research Fellow at the Australian Red Cross Lifeblood, and this story will be followed up on Drive after the 6 o'clock news with Andy Park.